Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about how you can scaffold your Microsoft SQL Server into models, views, and stored procedures, and how you can call CRUD operations, call your views and stored procedures from ASP.NET Core Web API using Entity Framework Core. For this demo, we are going to use Northwind database. People who don't have this database, I have a SQL script which will generate this database for you guys. It's there on GitHub. I'll show you that in a minute. But we'll scaffold this database and we'll perform all the CRUD operations in Web API. We'll also load related data in the Web API. We'll also call a stored procedures from this Web API to see if we can do that or not. And we'll also call a view from our ASP.NET Core Web API project to see if we can do that or not. Like I mentioned, Northwind is a relational database, and you'll find the script to generate this database in my GitHub repo. Let's go ahead and do that. For that, I'm gonna go to my browser here. You can see this EF core all database considered repo. I'll share this link in the video description. If you go to MS SQL Server folder, in here we have this Northwind SQL script. If you run this, this should generate the database for you. I'm going to go to my SQL Server Management Studio, and here I'm going to run this query to generate that database. So if I execute this, then this will generate that database for me. If I refresh this database, then you can see this database getting generated here. Here we have tables, customers, employees, and we'll be dealing with customers today to show the demo. We also have some stored procedures. If I go to programmability and open stored procedures, you can see this. We have some stored procedures. We are going to call this customer order detailed stored procedures from our web API. And then we have some views. We are going to call this customer and suppliers by city view for our demo. So let's go ahead and create a web API and call all these models and stored procedures and views from our web API. So for that, I'm going to go to my Visual Studio. This is Visual Studio 2022. I'm going to create a new project and I'm going to search for web API template. And I'm going to select ASP.NET Core Web API for C# and then click on Next. Here is going to ask me the name of the project. I'm going to make sure that it's getting created in the same folder so that I can share this project with you. This project will be on GitHub so that you can compare your code with it when you practice it. So I'm going to name the project as northwind.msql and then go to next window. Here I'm going to select the target framework as .NET 6. It got released, I think, a week ago. You can, when you install Visual Studio 2022, you should get that with it. And I'm not going to enable Docker, and I don't really care for the controller and Open API. I'm just going to leave it that way. And then I'm going to click on Create. It's going to create our ASP.NET Core Web API template project, which returns random weather forecast for the next 5 days. Let's quickly look at this project and then we'll run this project. So they used to have startup.cs. They don't have that anymore. There's only program.cs. And in program.cs is where the entry point is. This is where we are creating the builder. And then once we have the builder, we're using that builder to add some services. And you can see that we have added the Swagger service so that we can call our web APIs with a nicer UI. And then we are building app, and then we are configuring that app. We have this map controller, and a controller is also added into this project. And finally, we are running the app, right? So we have this weather forecast model, and we have a controller. This controller returns random forecast for the next 5 days. Let's go ahead and run this and see if we can get this working. So I'm going to click on this start without debugging button, and you can see that it returned our web API. We can see this nice UI because of the Swagger package that we added. It's part of the template. And let's go ahead and call this weather forecast. I'm gonna try it out and then click on execute. And this will return weather forecast for the next 5 days. And you can see it in a nice JSON format. Now let's go ahead and configure our database with our web API so that we can perform CRUD operations on our customer table here. So this is a customer table, and I would like to perform CRUD operations on this customer table from our web API. So first thing, we'll have to scaffold this database, right? So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio, and here I'm going to use an extension which is called as EF Core Power Tool. If you search for this extension, you'll find it on the top. It's called as EF Core Power Tool. I've already installed it. You'll have to restart your machine in order to use it. So I'm gonna use that for my project too. I'm gonna right click on this project, and then you can see this option here, EF Core Power Tool, and click on Reverse Engineer. Here you can add a connection. I've already added a connection, but if you want to add a connection, you can click on Add. And here I'm gonna look for localhost SQL Express. You can do this with SQL Server too. I'm using SQL Express, but this could be done with SQL Server too. And you can see this Northwind database in the dropdown that we just created. I'm going to select that and click on OK, and that connection gets added in my pop-up here. Here I'm going to select EF Core 6 that we would like to scaffold, and then I'm going to click on OK. Once I click on OK, then it's going to ask me what all things that I would like to scaffold. Here, I'm going to select all the tables in the database that I would like to scaffold. I'm going to select all the views which are there in the database that I would like to scaffold. And we also have stored procedures, all of the stored procedures in the database that I would like to scaffold. Once I click on OK, it's going to ask some more questions like, do you want these files which are getting scaffolded in a particular folder? What namespace do you want to assign to them? So the folder in which I would like my models to get scaffolded, I'm going to name that folders as models, of course. And I'm also going to assign a namespace which is going to be northwind.model. So I'm going to put models here. I would like to scaffold my DB context in data folder. So I'm going to say that this is going to be data, and the namespace of it is going to be northwind.msql.data. You can also pluralize and singularize the objects which are getting generated. I always have a hard time pronouncing pluralize. Anyways, so I'm going to select, I would like to select that option. And there are some other options too, like data annotation, including uh, connection string into generated code. I don't like to do that, so I'm not gonna select that. You can also select this install EF Core provider package into the project. So we are going to need provider packages, right? We are using SQL Server database, so we are going to need the packages for that. I'm going to check that, but I think there's a bug in this extension. It doesn't uh, install these packages for the project, but we'll do that manually. That's not a big deal. And you can also have some advanced options. I'm not gonna get into this, but once I click on OK, then it's going to generate models and DB context for my project. If I go to models folder here, you can see that it created models for all the tables, all the views, and all the stored procedures for my database into the models folder. And if I go to my DB context, this Northwind DB context is actually opened here. It mapped those models with all the tables which are there in our database. So you can scroll down and see what all things have been configured here. But let's go ahead and fix these errors. For that, I'm going to have to install a couple of packages. For that, I'm going to go to my Chrome browser. The first package that we would like to install is Microsoft Entity Framework Code Design. I'm going to copy this package reference and go to my project here. I'm going to go to my project and add a package reference. And we'll also have to add a package reference for our provider, database provider. I'm gonna go to this another Nuget package, and I'm gonna get this package too. I'm gonna share these links with you in the video description. I'm gonna grab this package reference and go to my project here, and I'm gonna add this package reference here. Once I add that, then I'm gonna save my project file. Once I save the project file, then those package reference will get added into my project. And if I go to my context file here, you can see those errors went away. I'm gonna quickly build my solution here. If I build a solution, then all those errors will be gone. And now we should be able to run our project. But we just created models and DB context for our project. We did not connect our database to our project. So we are going to need to add our connection string and a service which is going to connect to this database. So let's first go ahead and add a connection string. For that, I'm going to open my app settings. And here I'm going to add a connection string in my app settings. I'm going to select connection string, and here I'm going to add a connection string called as northwind db. And if you want to get the connection string, you can get it from Visual Studio. For that, I'm going to open my SQL Server Object Explorer. You can get that from here. If you go to View, you'll get the SQL Server Object Explorer from here. And here, I've already configured my server here, but you can add a SQL Server like this and select your SQL Server from network or from local machine. So I have selected this. You can see Northwood getting populated here. And I'm going to open this, and I'm going to right click on Northwind and go to properties. And here you'll see a connection string property that we can use in our app setting. So I'm going to select all, copy that, and then paste it here. And then we can use this connection string in our project. Now that we have the connection string in app settings, let's go ahead and add this DB context as a service for our project so that we could inject this in our project anywhere and use it. For that, I'm going to go to my program.cs where we are adding Swagger. I'm going to add DB context right after it. And I've added a snippet for it, which is this. So if I add these 4 lines of code, which is build services and add DB context, I'm passing the class name of the DB context, which we created. And then in the options, I'm saying we would like to use SQL Server, and I'm passing the connection string that we just added in our app settings. Here, I'm going to add a namespace so that it doesn't throw error, which is Microsoft Entity Framework code. Now that we have this service, now that we have the connection string, we can create a controller from our Visual Studio, which will give us the CRUD operations. For that, I'm going to go to my controller folder, and I'm going to right click on this, and then I'm going to add a controller. And here I'm going to select API. And in API, we have this option of API controller with actions using Entity Framework Core, which will create CRUD operations from your model. So I'm going to click on Add here. And here you can select the model that you would like to use your CRUD operations for. And you can select the DB context, which is going to be Northwind context, and it's going to also name your controller as customers controller. These texts are getting cropped because I've increased the font of Visual Studio, but this will look nicer if you're using the default font. And this is the customer controller, the name of the controller. I'm going to click on add. This is going to add a couple of packages in my Visual Studio, and it's also going to create a controller which will have create, read, update, and delete operations for my customers. And we will run our project once it is done generating that code. So I'll give it a couple of seconds to generate that piece of code. Okay, So it created this controller, which is customers controller. And in this, we have a method to get all the customers. I'm using this context, which is getting injected here, which is Northwind context. We added this as a service, and it's calling get customers. It's loading all the customers here. This is one web API. It's getting one customer depending on uh, the customer ID that you're going to pass. So this is also an HTTP get method. We have a put method, which is going to update a customer. So if you would like to update a customer by its ID, you can do that too. You can see that we are finding that we are looking for its state, that customer state, and then we are saving that customer. And then we have post customer where we are adding the customer into our DB set. And then we are saving the changes to save the new customer into the system. And then finally, we have delete customer by its ID. We will find that customer and we'll pass that customer in this remove method of the DB set. And then finally, we'll call save changes async so that we can save the changes and delete that customer. Let's go ahead and run this and see if we can perform CRUD operations from our web API or not. So I'm going to quickly run this and then go to my browser. You can see that it listed down the CRUD operations here. We just had weather forecast in the beginning. Now we have all these 5 web APIs too, which is pretty quick to generate. Now let's go ahead and perform all these operations. So here I'm gonna get all the customers. I'm gonna try it out. I'm gonna execute it, and this will load all the customers in my database. So you can see that there are so many customers which are getting loaded in this JSON format. If I go to my database and rerun this query, you can see that these customers are now getting loaded in JSON format. So that's how easy it was to connect to database and get all the customers. Let's go ahead and create a customer. For that, I'm gonna grab this last customer and we'll make one change in that customer. We'll change its ID and we'll post a new customer here. So in the request body, I'm going to paste that last customer that I copied. And here I'm gonna change its ID to wall GX, and then I'm gonna execute it. If I execute, that customer gets created in my database, and you can look it up by its ID. I'm going to copy its ID, and you can go to this get method where you can pass the ID and get the customer too. If I pass the ID and get the customer, you can see the customer is getting populated here. You can also update a customer. So I'm going to copy this JSON and then go to this put method, which is updating the customer, and I'm going to try it out. And here I'm going to select the JSON that we just copied, and the contact number, contact name, I'm going to set as curious, right? And pass the ID as WaltZX. And then if I say execute, then it will update my contact name too. If I look it up again here, you can see that name getting updated here. You can also, of course, delete a customer. I'm going to go to this delete method and try it out, and it's going to delete that customer. You can see that it said it deleted properly. And if I try to look it up, it's going to say not found because we just deleted that customer. So if I click on find, you can see that it's saying not found because we just deleted the customer. So this is how you can perform CRUD operations and how easy it is to scaffold the database and perform all these operations from Web API. Now that we have covered scaffolding and performing create, read, update, and delete, let's go ahead and load related data. So loading related data, that means I would like to load something which is related data. So if you look at this query here, I'm loading customers and orders for that customer. So it's like an inner join query. If I run this, then it loads orders for this customer. And this is something that I would like to show in a web API. For that, I'm gonna add some piece of code in my customer controller. And this code is going to be on GitHub, like I mentioned before. So you don't have to worry about uh, not finding this code. I'll put the link in the video description. So if I go to toolbox here, I've added this piece of code, which is going to load related data. Here, I'm going to pass a customer ID, and then I'm going to use context to find that customer. And then I'm going to call this include method to include orders for that customer and then return first or default. Now I'm going to run this, but we are going to run into a problem that we can fix, and I would like to show how you can fix that. So I'm going to run this, and that web API will get populated here. And here, if I pass a customer ID, I would like to find which customer ID that we can pass. So I'm gonna just pass this customer ID, and if I go to my browser here and pass that customer ID to load the orders for that customer, then it's going to throw an error because you can't is going to say possible object cycle detected. So you can't show an object which is nested with other objects directly. You're going to need to ignore that serializing property. So let's go ahead and do that. For that, we're going to need to add a package, which is going to be Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC Newton Soft JSON. I'm going to grab this and then go to my project. And then in the project, I'm going to add that as a reference. Now that we have added this package, let's go ahead and add this reference, this as a service. So I'm going to go to my program.cs. And here I'm going to add a couple of lines to add that as a service. For that, I'm going to go to my toolbox and add a line, which is going to be builder services add MVC and add Newtonsoft JSON. And you can see the serializer setting where we are saying the reference loop handling, we would like to ignore that. So I'm gonna add that into my code. And I added a using statement so that it doesn't throw any errors. Now let's go ahead and see if we can load related data or not. So I'm gonna run this again and go to my browser. Here I'm gonna pass the customer ID again, which is alpha key. And I'm going to try it out, pass the customer ID. That's not the customer ID. This is the customer ID. I'm going to pass that, execute it, and now it's not going to throw any error. It's going to load the customer information and the orders information for that customer. So there are 6 orders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's the end of it. And then you can see there are 6 orders for that customer. So this is how we can load related data. Now let's go ahead and load a stored procedure. For that, I'm gonna open the stored procedure. So this is customer order details stored procedure, and I would like to call that. Let's go ahead and call it from here first and show you what results are getting populated here. So I'm going to pass an order ID and click on OK. And it's going to return 3 products for that order ID. And we would like to show this result in JSON format. For that, I'm gonna go to my project here again and then add some piece of code, which is just one line of code. So if I go to my toolbox here again, I'm gonna add another web API, which is going to be customer order details async, which takes order ID. And here there's only one line. You can see this. We have this context that we injected, and we have this get procedure method. So if I go to my data folder, we have this Northwind context procedures class, which has this get procedures method. It returns all the procedures for the database. So that's what we are doing here. And we are returning customer order details stored procedure here, and we would like to call that stored procedure. So let's go ahead and run this and see if we can call that stored procedure or not. So if I go to my browser here again, I'm going to pass that order ID. I can get that order ID from here, and then I'm going to pass it here. When I execute it, it's going to load those three products that we just saw in our SQL Server. So those will get loaded in JSON. Finally, I would like to load a view, which is also a single line. I'm going to add that code from here. I added a web API, which is customer and suppliers by city, which is a view in my SQL Server. If I go to my view and then select this, then it's going to load 120 records, city, company name, contact name, and relationship. And if I go to my web API here, I'm calling contacts, and this is customer and suppliers by city. It's a model which was created. So this is the model which was created. And I would like to return all of the results for that view, right? So I'm gonna run this again. And if I go to my browser again, it's going to populate that customers and suppliers by city web API. And if I try it out, execute it, it's going to return all the results for the view which are there. So if I look at the results, you can see the city, company name, contact name, and relationship, which are the same columns that we are returning from our view. So this is how you can scaffold database, perform CRUD operations, load related data, call a stored procedures, call a view, and interact with your database in JSON format using ASP.NET Core Web API and EF Core. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on my Twitter or Facebook handle, or you can ask questions in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.